Hi everyone, welcome to lesson 3.2. We're continuing to learn about solving quadratic equations, and in this lesson we'll learn about solving by factoring. So this is going to combine some stuff we learned in last unit. Okay, to solve by factoring, we need to know something called the zero product property. And this is a fancy name for a pretty simple fact that you guys probably kind of intuitively already know. The zero product property says that if two things slash numbers multiply to zero, then one of them must be zero. So, kind of symbolically, we could represent this as if A times B equals 0, then A equals 0 or B equals 0. So we have two numbers multiplied together giving 0, then either this one is 0 or this one is 0. And this makes sense. If you have two numbers that aren't 0, and you multiply them together, you can't get 0. Like 1 times 7 is 7. 18 times 5 is some number that's not 0. 100 times 60 is a number that's not 0. You can't get 0 if you have two non-zero things multiplied together. So if you have two things, you multiply them, and you get 0, one of them has to be 0. It's the only way you can get 0 by multiplication. It's multiplying one of the numbers by 0. Okay, so that might seem a little weird. Why are we talking about that? It's going to be a step in our solving process. So let's keep this in our mind, and then I'm going to explain kind of our solving technique with factoring. Zero product property is going to come up in there. As I explain the technique, I'll do an example. So for our solving by factoring technique, the first step is to make sure everything is on one side of the equation. This might already be done for you, but sometimes you might have some numbers on one side, some numbers on the other, so you need to make sure everything's on one side. So step one is to get all terms on one side of the equation. And when you do this, the other side of the equation is going to end up being 0. There's nothing over there. So the goal of this is that one side has to be 0. Okay, so let's do this for our example. We have x squared and x on the left, and then we have 12 on the right. We need to get everything on one side. It doesn't matter which side we go to, but it's going to make your life easier if you keep x squared positive. So if you have a positive x squared, move everything over to be with x squared. So we want to move this 12 over to this side. And we can do that by subtracting it. So if I subtract 12 from the right, I can subtract 12 from the left. On the left, I now have x squared plus x minus 12. None of those are like terms, so I can't put them together, so I just have to write minus 12 at the end. And then on the right side of the equation, I have 12 minus 12, which is 0. Okay, so basically I moved this 12 over to the other side by making it negative. And then I have nothing left over here because I moved the 12, so I have 0. Okay, now we've got a quadratic. It's equal to 0. The next step is to factor that quadratic. And this is just like when we learned factoring in the last unit. So we're going to factor the quadratic. So let's do that. We set up our factors. So we want to make the left side of our equation look like that. Two factors multiplied together. And we know that we need to find two numbers that are going to add to 1. This is 1x, so we need to add to 1 and multiply to negative 12. So let's list our factors of 12 and then look for 2 that would add to 1. So the factors of 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. So which pair could make a positive 1? We can make a positive 1 out of 3 and 4, right? If we make the 3 negative and the 4 positive, we're going to get 1. So we need a negative 3 and a positive 4 in our factors. Let's do a quick check. X times x is x squared. X times 4 is 4x. Minus 3 times x is minus 3x. So we have 4x and minus 3x. That gives us our middle term of just 1x. And then minus 3 times positive 4 is minus 12. So we did it right. Okay, so we factored. Now our third step is to use the zero product property. So the way the zero product property applies here is that we have two things being multiplied to 0. They're not single numbers, but they're expressions. So that's why I said things. So this guy times this guy equals 0. Zero product property says one of them has to be 0 if that's the case. So we're going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve for x. Zero product property is telling me either x minus 3 equals 0. That's the first thing we're in our multiplication. Or the other possibility is that x plus 4 equals 0. So if we're comparing to a times b equals 0, then a equals 0 or b equals 0, think of x minus 3 as a. So either a equals 0 and x plus 4 is b. So either a equals 0 or b equals 0, because when you multiply them together, you get 0. So one of them has to be 0. Okay, so now we have two possibilities and we just need to get x by itself. If x minus 3 equals 0, then x would have to be 3. And if x plus 4 equals 0, then x would have to be minus 4. Okay, so we have our two solutions to our equation. We did it. And incidentally, this answers our question that we may have had from last unit about why you flip the signs of the roots. Roots are finding where a quadratic is equal to 0. So we would have our quadratic equal to 0. We can factor it. Zero product property has us set each factor equal to 0, and then we solve for x, and that ends up having us flip the sign because we're moving it over to the other side. So this process is the reason behind the flipping the signs of the roots. Okay, that's the basic overview. I'm going to stop this video here and then I'll go through 2 more examples in the next video.